For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 23. Embers of Darkness. Wedge couldn't recall his walk back to his quarters. As soon as the door slid shut on the cramped 7 by 5 foot of privacy, his legs gave out and he sank onto his bunk. Something might have been said earlier about interim governing bodies and reforms and the Galactic Alliance, but Wedge had heard little beyond Luke's words on Princess Leia, Anakin Skywalker, and Darth Vader. Leia being his sister wasn't so hard to take. Sure, the odds of a kid from an Outer Rim moisture farm being related to an Alderaanian princess was incredible. But knowing them both, it seemed perfectly obvious. But their father? Luke had been adamant that Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader were different people, with the Force and the dark side and all that, but Wedge didn't know about the Force. He knew Luke and Leia, and he knew of the feared and hated Darth Vader. Everyone knew of that masked terror. How could his friends be that monster's children? Bespin! That must have been when Luke had learned of it. As much as Luke had tried to convince everyone that he had recovered from the duel, Wedge had always known that something had irrevocably changed. Something fundamental, something that could never be undone. Wedge knew how Luke used to feel about Vader. But then after discovering that the terrifying Dark Lord was his father and losing his hand in the same encounter, it was anybody's guess. He had no idea when the princess had learned of it. She hadn't always known. He was sure of it. There was that whole debacle with the first Death Star, after all, and the princess hated Vader. Despised him. Wedge had thought his own family dynamics was messed up. He couldn't hold a candle to these two. All this time, they had been Vader's children. It was especially shocking regarding Luke. They had flown together into battle and back, formed a close bond from shadowing and relying on each other and saving each other like it was second nature. But biting hard on those thoughts came precisely that same realization. It was Luke, the very same who trusted and relied on him in turn, his leader and friend. How much courage had it taken to bear that knowledge and still keep fighting, alongside the friends and allies, the only family he knew of who might turn on him if they discovered the truth. Not to mention the guts needed to spill all to the entire galaxy. What kind of a person could do that? Suddenly, Wedge gave a short laugh. That was exactly what made Luke, flying against the odds if it was the right thing to do, whatever it took. The princess was no different. Twins indeed. In the end, it wasn't so hard to take in. And for Wedge, it was a defining moment to realize that nothing had really changed. Thinking for a moment, he sent a quick message to his remarkable friend before heading out of his quarters to look for the other starfighter pilots. Whoever spoke against either of them would have to answer to him. Jedi don't get drunk? I've got another bottle of Wyron's Reserve stashed away. Come find me when you want to be drunk under the table. Clear skies, boss. W.A. A relieved smile tugged at Luke's mouth. Good old Wedge, telling him that everything was good between them. It was welcome reassurance, especially at that moment, and he took a moment to return a short message. You're on. But you shouldn't be so eager to lose again. Really, Jedi don't get drunk. Clear skies, Wedge. L.S. An unofficial post-coronation assembly, Mothma had explained. Don't worry, it'll be informal. Luke didn't believe she knew the meaning of the word. Awash in a sea of luxurious robes and glittering jewels and all the extravagance that was habitual in the Imperial Palace, Luke couldn't see much difference from the lavish inauguration ceremony he had earlier suffered through. Current and former government officials, functionaries, administrators, and senior staff, former senators, powerhouses of affluent and influential corporations and banks and guilds, the aristocracy of numerous worlds, and high-ranking officers of the Imperial forces and various security branches milled around the cavernous hall, already numbering several hundred and increasing steadily as more elite heavyweights arrived at the galactic capital at this supposedly informal gathering to greet the new emperor. Never had Luke felt so out of his depth. The language of politics was a complete enigma, a stream of familiar words with entirely unfamiliar nuances that were subtle and complex and more far-reaching than he could immediately grasp. You could sense the verbal battles being waged around him, but unlike combat with lightsabers and blasters, he was an amateur when it came to analyzing all the possible illusions concealed within the seemingly civil words, as well as in what was left unsaid, and to consider his own reply to frame the exact implications and insinuations he wanted to deliver, but no more and no less, all in the space of a breath to maintain a natural stream of conversation. As one important dignitary after another breached the natural space that seemed to have cleared around his tight-knit group, all approaching in some unspoken order he couldn't understand, and introduced to him by a smartly dressed aide whose exact function he couldn't name, Luke simply tasked himself with not offending anybody and restricted himself to bog-standard greetings. He relied on his more experienced allies for the intricate handling of probing queries and entreaties, observing keenly while Mothma and Leia traversed fluently through this ensnaring miasma, his bright eyes the only betrayal of how impressed he was at their aptitude in this intangible war. It was intense and exhausting in an entirely different way to his usual practice drills, and after 2 hours he was beginning to glaze over from the overload of new people and information. Perhaps sensing this, Mothma had signaled the announcement aide, as Luke had dubbed him, and visitations had been suspended while he grabbed some much-needed refreshments. Explain to me again why the galaxy's bigwigs are hanging out in a corridor, Han muttered from behind as Luke sent his message to Wedge and tucked away his handheld data memo com. From his position on a raised step behind them, Han kept a sharp eye over the sea of milling people. 2 companies with close to 300 clone stormtroopers already dotted every nook and cranny of the hall, giving the place a somewhat snowy appearance, and several further reserve companies were on standby. But even with their genetically programmed loyalty to Luke by virtue of his holding the title of Emperor, Han still wouldn't trust them with a single nut bolt from his Falcon. It's called the Grand Reception Hall, Han, Luke reminded quietly out of the corner of his mouth, attempting to curb a smile. It's a corridor, Han said flatly. Freakishly huge, I'll admit, but it's still a blasted corridor. Freakishly huge might have even been an understatement. If the towering columns spanning its length as far as the eye could see were removed, the cavernous hall with the multiple mezzanine balconies overlooking the ground level might have housed a small star destroyer. It's symbolic, Leia added from beside them. This was the main artery of Palpatine's reign, the hub where everything else that wasn't Palpatine happened. Yeah, now Luke's taken over, I get it. But it's still a corridor. Couldn't we have at least made it less creepy? Han shivered as he cast his eyes along the cut-glass windows, tinted blood red and looming tall between the carved sable stone walls. The hollow plants did add something to the decor, but we had to remove them, unfortunately. They were spying on us, sweetheart. There's nothing more creepy than spying plants. Don't even get me started on the security nightmare with all the ways in and out of this place. Between General Madine and General Rex, they've got things well covered. You know there's no covering this place, kid. I mean, look at all those levels and doors and turbo lifts and alcoves and side chambers. And that's just what we can see. Who knows how many hidden passages are buried around this mausoleum. Our engineers and architects have been over every inch of this sector, Han. And you think that means they've found every possible entry point? Luke pointedly didn't reply. Exactly, Han huffed. These weren't their stomping grounds. We need people with inside knowledge, but then that becomes a whole other can of space worms. Spying, double-crossing us, misinformation, spying again. These people would have met here anyway, Han, Leia interrupted what could have been a rather long list, and we needed to be here. We've done what we can. Besides, you're here, Luke's here, and Chewie's here. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Han asked dryly, touched by her vote of confidence, but not placated as he resumed his close scrutiny of the galaxy's elites dithering around them. Luke likewise returned to his previous scanning of the hall. Lacking the years of political experience that Leia and Mothma had, he instead relied on the Force to decipher the complex web of alliances and areas of friction. For the majority of people, the main objective appeared to be to keep their opinions open, greeting both his party and Dangor's group holding court some distance down the generous space. Regardless of the official line spouting unity and cooperation, all were aware of the division between them. Nobody wanted to be left in the dust, and they vied for a position in the new government, whatever form it would eventually take. He noted the few whose support was genuine and decisive, but unfortunately there was plenty of enmity concealed behind false smiles and empty flattery. Amongst those who had gained the most under Palpatine, there was much ill feeling at the fact that former rebels now led the Empire. Despite his best efforts not to actively read anyone's minds, Rash's thoughts flew at him of their own accord. He's just a boy, Darth Vader's son. Are they really Vader's children? Can he strangle people like Vader used to? Organa and Mothma are obviously doing all the work. What a leech. Anakin Skywalker's son! I wonder if he can read lines like Vader could. He looks harmless. What is a Jedi anyway? Did he really do anything in that battle over Naboo? Oh no, is he reading my mind now? Hello? Your Majesty, if you're reading my mind, I must humbly apologize. Oh no, this is not good. Not good. Oh, I feel ill. Lips twitching, Luke barely managed to contain his amusement as a portly man dashed away through the crowd, a frantic aide chasing after the flapping trails of his lush fur cape. I concur, Leia was saying when he returned his attention to the gathering around him. I hate Sky. Roll up. I recall he had close ties to Passage before the Senate was disbanded. Generally, however, it is all rather pleasant. Luke wondered at Mothma's emphasis on that last word. As we suspected, Leia agreed. But it's still early days. The far-flung senators are still returning and increasing by the minute. Luke took that to mean the former senators who had been further removed from Palpatine, and not just in terms of physical distance. The two women seemed to be taking a poll of sorts, one that he had been tracking with the Force, which indicated that genuinely supportive allies were increasing, and the balance was shifting away from Dangor. He met the hawkish glare from across the hall. Roll up, this is the I Hate Luke Skywalker fan club, Han sing-songed quietly in his ear. Even Han wasn't blind to the Imperial advisor's blatant refusal to greet him during this assembly. You're supposed to be watching them, not watching me watching them, Luke murmured back in amusement. Yeah, well, Han drawled. Most of the action's around the food, and Chewie's got that well covered. Luke glanced across at the Wookiee a few feet away, practically drooling as he hungrily eyed the long tables as a steady stream of dignitaries passed by. They were piled high with a mouth-watering array of delicacies from across the galaxy. Their Force heaved, and his reply was forgotten. Luke and his friends had their own comlink earpieces in case of emergencies, and Luke's sharp focus swept the hall as he used the Force to activate it. General Madine, General Rex, be alert. Yes, sir, came the instant replies in his ear to his softly spoken command. His friends nearby continued as though they had not heard him, betraying no sign of anything out of the ordinary in order to avoid causing unnecessary panic. Still conversing quietly, they discreetly scoped out the hall. Han activated his own earpiece. Your Majesty, the announcement aide said as he approached with a bow. The President of the Galactic Bank and his senior associates wish to extend their greetings. May I be permitted to introduce them? They may be received first when we resume. Mothma delayed smoothly. The aide retreated with another bow. The Force jittered, becoming increasingly agitated. Sir, we have encountered 2 assault teams in ground-level foyers, Rex reported in Luke's ear from his command position overseeing the numerous passageways approaching the hall. They're dressed as Palpatine's royal guard. You sure? Han wanted to verify, tapping his ear to speak. We had them comfortably putting their feet up in the palace detention blocks. From their uniform and assault formations, and what we have seen on their command signals, all indications so far point to the royal guard. I will inform you if there is any reason to suspect otherwise. Status, General? Luke queried. Situation is under control, sir. The attackers will be momentarily contained. We have minimum casualties. Civilians have been safely redirected. Inside the hall, everything appeared as normal. The skirmish outside was too discreet to be seen or heard here, and there was no disruption to the ebb and flow of people. The sonorous hum of conversation droned on amidst the soft tinkling of crystal glasses and deluxe tableware. But the Force was urgent and clear in its warnings, and Luke abandoned all concealment as he tapped his ear to instruct his other friends to link in. A large-scale attack within the hall is imminent. Expect multiple assault teams at multiple entry points. General Madine secure all levels, activate shields, and protect the dignitaries. The announcement aide paled as he overheard the Emperor's crisp orders, but before he could even begin to phrase a question, mass troop movement flooding into the hall sent the tension rocketing. Chewie immediately gravitated toward his friends with his bowcaster ready in his giant paw. The platoon assigned to protect Luke immediately formed a defensive circle around his group, conspicuous in the distinctive blue-on-white armor of the 501st. For such a critical responsibility as the Emperor's personal protection, the usual lieutenant who commanded the 36-men detail had been superseded by Major Bao, who had been loyal to Vader to the letter. Bao hefted a heavy blaster rifle with ease, his dual blaster pistol still holstered at his waist. Elsewhere, the hall was in lockdown as another company joined the two already in position, the vast majority being stormtroopers but with Alliance soldiers interspersed among them. They took a position in every doorway and between every column on every level and heaved over the banquet tables to create large defensive areas below the overhanging mezzanines where they swiftly herded the dignitaries. Cries of alarm and protest at the rough handling were silenced with sharp orders without discussion. Portable shield generators were placed alongside the overturned tables and large shimmering blue domes sprang up and down the hall, containing the hundreds of dignitaries in dozens of groups. It was a testament to the sheer size of the blaze that the hall still felt rather spacious, despite the occupants now numbering well in excess of 1,000. Mothma, not being a soldier, quietly allowed herself to be directed into one of the shielded domes, but Major Bao found himself stonewalled by the rest of her party, including the Emperor himself. As the watery shielding rippled downwards and closed on the last protective dome, Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie sidestepped the steering arms to stand alongside the troops taking up defensive formations. "Za," Major Bao insisted. "I must request that you retreat to safety behind the shields." "We're of more help out here, Major," Luke reasoned. "We're no strangers to combat. But any attacks will in all probability be after you, Your Majesty. All the more reason to be out here than behind the shields, endangering the people sheltered with us." Seeing that the new Emperor had no intention of relenting, the Major directed his platoon to settle in formation around them with the greatest reluctance to await the imminent attack. The air was thick with indignation and not a bit of fear as the civilian VIPs nervously cast their eyes about, searching for the cause of all the fuss. The three companies of stormtroopers maintained their positions, motionless but alert, primed to react at the first order or hint of trouble. The dignitaries had no such discipline. Feet shuffled, throats were cleared, luxurious robes rustled. It was all rather anticlimactic. Nothing happened. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded a haughty voice from somewhere down the hall. "This is Rex. All stations secure, sir," came the report over the comm in the commander's ears. "This is Maydeen. All stations secure." The seconds ticked on, pregnant with expectation. Some heavy sighs, whispered as breaths unconsciously held, were gradually released. "Is this some elaborate hoax?" came the same voice again, dripping with derision. "Huh, let's see you being so cocky on this side of the shields," Han grumbled under his breath. "Perhaps a training exercise?" suggested another voice, either just naive or suggesting a more diplomatic rationale. A muted buzz gradually rose from the shielded clusters of people when they could no longer refrain from speculating about the security scare. Word gradually sped that it was the newly inaugurated Emperor Skywalker himself who had given the order for lockdown, but nobody could explain the cause with any certainty. Many were of the opinion that it was a false call. Even Major Bao flickered his gaze once or twice to the Jedi. Luke ignored it all, tracing the tremors and flares in the Force as the warning bells only grew more insistent. Those who knew him best took their cue from him and remained alert, assured of his uncanny ability to sense an imminent threat, even if the how of it remained a mystery. To them, it had only been a matter of time when the alarm was eventually sounded. "Incoming!" The cacophony of blaster fire was distinct and abrupt. Stormtroopers rushing to fend off the intruders tumbled with the assailants in a mishmash of crimson and white. The commotion was replicated up and down the hall as red-robed invaders sprang up out of nowhere and began emptying their arsenal on the shield domes. Initially, only in a few isolated pockets along the hall. In no time, there were dozens of localized areas of fighting, bristling with heavy blaster rifles, force pikes, and vibro swords, and complete with their distinctive red masks. The attackers cut a ferocious appearance draped in crimson. Although far outnumbered by the stormtroopers, the Royal Guards had been Palpatine's elite fighting force, handpicked rigorously, trained and brainwashed to fanatical loyalty. Banded into simple but effective 4-4 formations, where each squad comprised 3 units, which in turn consisted of 4 guardsmen each, the 3 units alternated defense and attack like 3 planets rotating around each other, progressing towards the civilians or engaging the stormtroopers from wherever they materialized, which was seemingly everywhere, from behind a towering pillar, the underside of an overhanging mezzanine, right above the domed shields, or out of the carved inky stonework. Hidden passageways snapped open without warning. 12 guardsmen would slip out of a narrow opening and immediately drop into their 3x4 formation with well-slicked fluidity, after which the concealed doors would reseal themselves, leaving no noticeable sign of their having opened at all. Worse was how the red robes also disappeared again. As soon as any of the 3 units in a squad were reduced to 2 or fewer guards, the remaining squad would vanish, utilizing the concealed entrances that only they seemed to have knowledge of or control over. To add insult to injury, wherever they reappeared, they always numbered their full complement. They continued to pop up and slip away in different places, effectively teleporting and replenishing it with reserves. It made it impossible to estimate their numbers or formulate any effective strategic response. Right beside Luke's group, another 4-4 team rushed up from the floor and began firing on the neighboring shielded dome. With nearby stormtroopers already engaged with other assault teams, the dome was sparsely defended and vulnerable. "Major," Luke said immediately, indicating the situation beside them. "Take your men, deal with them." "Sir," Bao argued, "we can't leave you." He was interrupted by Luke unexpectedly stepping up to him right into his personal space, Luke's nose barely a handspan away from his mask. A firm hand gripped the Major's shoulders. "My friends and I can defend ourselves well enough. We will not have a massacre here today, Major Bao. Defend the people. That is our first priority." For a moment, the Major didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't speak. How could he, when those blue eyes, previously so warm and kind, had turned as cold as winters on Hoth and as piercing as that lightsaber? When that voice, as hard and unyielding as durasteel, cut through the cacophony around them despite only being spoken quietly, when he suddenly had the inexplicable notion that he was facing a giant, a titan of incredible power coiled within a deceptively slight body. Physically, Bao was taller than Skywalker, but he experienced the strangest sensation of looking up at the young man. This was the real Jedi, the good-natured young man in possession of the same rare qualities usually only found in figures of legend, that singular combination of charisma and assurance and magnetic energy, but who felt no need to impress it upon others, except in critical moments like these, when an order must be an order and they didn't have the luxury of time to be arguing. This was Vader's son. Bao dipped his helmeted head. "Understood, sir, but allow me to remain with you with 3 men. Belatedly realizing he was making demands of the Emperor, he added, "With your permission, sir." Skywalker nodded once and stepped away. The spell was broken. Clearing his throat, the Major selected 3 men, his best, and sent the rest of the platoon to tackle the assailants nearby. Barely had Luke satisfied himself that he had been heard loud and clear than a spike of warning in the Force compelled him to shout, "Look out, 12 o'clock!" The Royal Guard was barely halfway to the ground, dropping out of an access hatch that had gaped open overhead amidst the intricate carving in the pillar, his vibro sword already swinging at Chewie's neck, when he suddenly jerked backwards as though Luke's outstretched arm had actually punched him. The guard slammed into the pillar at his back with a ringing crack, the ebony stone fracturing under the impact. His limp body dropped heavily the rest of the way to the floor. The others of the 4-4 formation dropped down in quick succession, right in their midst. The prone guard's force pike swung up off the ground of its own accord. It jabbed at a second guard, wedging itself with unerring accuracy between the helmet and shoulder pauldron, zapping a pressure point. The guard promptly fell flat on his masked face. Chewie's roar preceded a metallic crunch as his bowcaster slammed into one assailant's armored chest before he swung his favorite weapon towards another who was aiming his blaster rifle at Han and let fly. The guard swiveled on the spot, the bolt skimming past his crimson helmet by a hair's breadth before cover fire from his compatriots drove the Wookiee around the pillar to avoid the rifle bolts. Chewie bellowed in frustration, but Han was already firing around him, arresting the assailant's offensive, and Chewie drove straight out again to swipe his meaty cleaver of a paw at the head that he had missed a moment ago. The guard spun, the motion this time uncontrolled and more resembling a spinning top, revolving fast enough to rotate on end until the momentum carried him crashing away across the floor in an awkward tumble of limbs and cape. A new triple war formation suddenly sprang out from behind the pillar, but Bo instantly signaled his small unit to batter them under a heavy assault to keep them off Skywalker's back. Accustomed to fighting together in such frantic close-quarters battles, Luke and his friends made short work of the rest of the first squad. "Cute, real cute," Han grumbled at a guard who had evaded his shots several times. Han dove to the floor at the returned fire, but popped back up again in a matter of moments. He lined up his shot, waited for the guard to lean out from behind the curve of a shield dome to take aim, then fired. "Gotcha!" He grinned. "2! This is easy!" "3!" Leia counted as she caught her third guard with her blaster. As with the first two guards that she had dropped, she was led by a familiar sense of intuition that she now knew to be influenced by the Force. Seeing past the fate, she fired in the path the guard was actually about to take. "3!" rumbled Chewie as his bowcaster hit home on another. "3!" Luke announced, his blaster bolt from the rifle he had lifted from one of the dead guards, finding an impossible path between the combating bodies to slam into a surprised assailant's chest. The Force snaps Luke's attention to another blaster bolt heading directly for his head. His lightsaber spun to life in his left hand and swung a tight arc, and with a hum and a zap, another guard fell from his own shot. "Form! Go Joe!" "Well, I just didn't want to show you up is all."
"Why, that's very thoughtful of you, Han,"
Leia teased. Yeah, it's just another part of my charm and personality." Han grouched, but the glimmer in his eyes softened any real bite to his words. It was understood that the numbers didn't really mean anything. They all focused on covering each other's backs rather than stacking up the count. No one questioned anyone's ability to hold their own. Having decimated the entire group of assailants before the guards could pull off their disappearing act, Luke and his friends joined Major Bo in dealing with the second wave. Everywhere Luke looked, the bright scarlet of the invading royal guards leapt out at him amidst the wash of stormtrooper white, and strobing across this entire backdrop was the lethal crisscross of blaster bolts and swinging force spikes. At Chewie's frantic roar, Luke returned his attention to his friends. Time slowed. Han was dodging fire from one guard, two more lay prone at his feet, but a fourth was slicing across with a sizzling force pike, aiming to decapitate Han. The Wookiee was wrestling with two red robes himself and howling at the obstacles that prevented him from reaching his friend. Luke reached with the force, but Leia was already there. A rapid succession of blaster bolts forced the guard to abort his attack at the scruffy head of hair and twist awkwardly aside, but the deadly laser fire followed him and he couldn't evade Leia's precise shooting. The initial bout of shots had been designed to force him away from his intended target. The next found their mark, dead center, and his last ever thought was the humiliation of being bested by a princess. "Behind you!" Han had turned after dealing with the guard in front of him, just in time to see the one falling away behind, as well as another aiming for Leia's unprotected back. Leia already had an inkling of the danger behind her, a prickling irritation at the back of her mind. She dropped to the floor and kicked out behind her, combining the moves fluidly to generate a solid sweep of her leg. Her smaller size and lower center of gravity was the decided advantage here, as the taller guard found his legs knocked out from beneath him. As he flailed at the sudden loss of support beneath him, a solid kick connected with his chest, but even winded and smashed to the ground, instinct from thousands of hours of conditioning and training still had him instantly cutting at the woman's supporting leg with a force pike, only to find she was no longer there. Dodging nimbly, she took him out with a blaster bolt fired at point-blank range. The remainder of the diminished Red Robe squad disappeared down an access hatch, leaving them with a brief lull in the fighting. "Are you okay?" Leia ran her gaze over Han to assure herself that he was still in one piece. Han, in turn, found himself unable to tear his eyes away from her as she neatly, expertly, and decisively dispatched with the threat. The sight of her dressed as an Alderaanian princess, but battling with such fiery energy, was just too captivating. The words tumbled out of their own accord. "I love you," he said, shaking his head slightly, his face a picture of wonder. It was like a light had suddenly shone on her face, and he could have stared at her forever. She grinned, her rich brown eyes alight with mischief. "I know." "Status, General?" "We're holding ground, sir," the clone commander replied. "From what I hear from Maydeen, the situation inside and outside the hall sounds similar. Same formation, same attacks." "We need to map out their entrance points," Luke said as he tilted his head aside fractionally, just enough to evade a stray blaster bolt. He was armed with the borrowed blaster, his lightsaber once again hanging from his belt. It was too dangerous to draw with allies in such close proximity. "Tech support is on it," Maydeen said, "but we still have no idea where or how they're controlling it." "What's the estimation on numbers?" "Several hundred guards have been transferred off system already, and Grand Admiral Piet has confirmed that they are still secure," Rex informed him. "But we can't reach the palace detonation blocks down below. All communications are down. Over 300 men were still here." "All right," Luke said calmly. "We maintain current defensive lines for now. Yes, sir, the two generals acknowledged. Keeping half an eye on the fighting around him, Luke reached out in the force and touched the presence that had been doing her best to hide from his notice ever since he had stepped into the hall hours earlier. He had respected her wishes and feigned ignorance until now, but stormtroopers were dropping all too fast and matters were coming to a head. We could really use your help. Will you come? He noted the momentary surprise on the other end of the mental link, which was rapidly followed by irritation and a teetering indecision. Please, Luke pressed. People are dying. He could have reminded her that she owed him for saving her life on Geonosis. He could have threatened or bribed. But he did none of these things, instead appealing with the honest truth of the pain he felt in watching the fighting around him, a fact of which the other was well aware. Her demeanor softened, then relented. Decision made, her presence rapidly headed towards Luke's position. It wasn't long before a lone figure dropped from the ceiling in front of their cover position and rolled to a crouch. Plainly cloaked in gray, the newcomer distinctly stood out from both the lavishly dressed elites and the uniformed troops. From their cover positions behind a pillar, Luke's companions trained their weapons on the new target, but trigger fingers paused at his upheld hand. Boldly ignoring the pointing blasters, the newcomer reached out to slip back the deep hood, revealing bright emerald eyes and tumbling waves of flame-red hair tied off to the side. You! Han exclaimed. Thank you for coming, Mara, Luke said, surprising his friends. You arranged this, Han demanded in disbelief. Mara J. dismissed the shocked glares born of surprise and outrage and everything in between, and focused on the one friendly face in front of her. I can map the hidden passageways and override controls. Who do I speak to? To those who had frequented the hall during Palpatine's reign, it was a startling development to witness the daunting but usually motionless royal guards now felling one stormtrooper after another. Only the new Emperor's close-knit group, as peculiar as it was with an Alderaanian princess and a Wookiee in their midst, noticeably surpassed the guards in skill. But in a hall teeming with over 1,000 people, there were only a few who were close enough to observe their particular blend of serious engagement and camaraderie. For the vast majority, their attention was drawn by the chilling crimson robes and helmets as the assailants continued their deadly and well-coordinated attack. And it soon became obvious just how well-coordinated. It took barely moments for the entire hall to notice when half of the shield domes spluttered and faded within seconds of each other. All of a sudden, half of the dignitaries were left exposed before the invading royal guards, hundreds of the very people key to the political, economic, and social stability of numerous systems now unprotected. In a brief moment of horrified realization, an amplified voice rang through the hall. Hold your fire! Although it was not immediately clear who gave the order, the command was nevertheless obeyed. By one side, since they were aware of the strategy, and by the other, in view of the glaring peril about to befall them. The ensuing words, clearly delivered through a mask from its mechanical quality, reinforced the initial demand and removed any lingering doubt as to their affiliation. Traitors to the true empire, hold your fire! After the din of the fighting, the silence of the sudden stillness was heavy and deafening. Stormtroopers glanced at their commanders. Commanders sought their generals. The generals, in turn, looked to their new emperor. Madine's voice over the comm was quiet. Just one word, but enough to contain all of his uncertainty and fear. Luke? Not Sir, not Skywalker. Just Luke. An appeal, whether Madine realized it or not, as though asking for more than a confirmation of the demand. A plea to the answer to the impossible situation before them. The Force gave Luke his strength, the ability to remain calm. Hold your fire, he confirmed. Jedi Skywalker, son of Vader, we wish to speak. The guard's mocking taunt was blatant, even in the mechanical tone. Step forth, if you are brave enough. Leia's frantic eyes sought his. Luke only paused long enough to nod reassurance before gracefully rising to his feet and stepping out from behind the pillar. A rush of motion flurried about him, but ceased just as abruptly at his sharply raised hand. Hold positions, he quietly ordered the stormtroopers who had attempted to rally around him. As he gave them a second to settle back, he reached out with the Force and sent out a silent query. I sincerely hope things are looking better there than they do here. Hang on. Whatever Mara was doing had her distracted. Once Luke was certain of the stormtrooper's compliance, he took another step out into the open. He cast his eyes over the sea of crimson and white and the rich tapestry of the galaxy's elites. And where might you be? A perfectly neutral question. His voice gave nothing away other than calm composure. It perfectly matched his posture, standing there easily as though admiring the scenery, with the singular oddity of a blaster dangling deceptively loosely in one hand. Movement on a second-level mezzanine, slightly further down the hall, caught his eye. It was lined with red robes, and one figure identical to all the others stepped forward to the edge of the open balcony. "Greetings, Master Jedi." "Greetings," Luke replied. Despite his tranquil demeanor, Luke's force senses were fully engaged. The guard had basic mental shielding, but it was no match against Luke's far superior affinity with the Force, and he detected the undercurrent of the other's emotions. Although attired in the same crimson robes as his brethren, there was something of this particular guard that felt more dangerous. He was smarter, more cunning, more devious. "We won't do anything as ineffectual as to ask you to hand over your lightsaber," the guard intoned. "We're perfectly aware of how much damage you can do without it. But you can see the position you are in." A gloved hand waved before him, the motion encapsulating the dire situation down on the ground level of the hall. The conversational element from the royal guard was unexpected, but Luke was too busy considering how to word his reply to react to it. Having spent the past few hours attempting to navigate the murky waters of galactic politics, where every word concealed its own inflections and nuances and consequences, he couldn't help but wonder if agreeing to that statement might be taken as indication of their defeat, instead of simply that they were in an impasse. "Aha! Got it!" Mara's sudden voice in Luke's head almost made him jump. "Go on," he replied, attempting to maintain concentration around him as well as listening to the voice in his head. Feigning distress bought him a few seconds. "I've sliced into their controls. They don't know it yet, but I can override all access to the passageways on your signal. I'm with Rex. The red zombies have hacked your comm frequencies, so best to give his orders through me. Can't reach Maydeen, though, without them hearing you. But something's wrong." Aloud, Luke elected for simply asking, "Why are you here?" "Isn't it obvious? Master Jedi, we demand your unconditional surrender." How original. Luke could imagine Han rolling his eyes. "The passageways are built from countless small compartments. Most are usually closed for containment, but they're opening up several routes." "And if I do?" Luke conjectured. "Will you release everyone unharmed and alive?" "Fastest tunnels leading out of the palace to the underground hovels of the city. It's a maze upon maze down there. We'll never find them again." "Half of the shields are down," the guard pointed out. "And the rest will follow quickly should we continue with our attack. All here will die today unless you surrender. The rest is hardly your concern, Master Jedi." "They've got enough transport speeders to evacuate all the royal guards too, and on the double. They're up to something." "I am their emperor now. Their fate is my concern." Deep-rooted anger and hatred flickered at Luke beneath basic but carefully constructed shields, and the guard's veneer of false civility began to disappear. "There is only one true emperor, and you are not he." Even with half his thoughts on Mara's warning, Luke had the presence of mind not to remind this volatile guard that it was too late for Palpatine. "These people are crucial to the health and stability of the Empire. Without them, there will be chaos." "But they've got us in a bind here, Mara. Why would they evacuate? Any ideas?" "Emperor Palpatine would rather see the Empire in ruins than to hand it over to a Jedi. Their fate is up to you." "Sorry, Luke." "What of those who were loyal to Palpatine? Lord Dangor is here, as are others of the ruling council. They will be honored to make the sacrifice to preserve the sanctity of Emperor Palpatine's vision. Now surrender or all here will die." Luke sighed. "And again I ask, what if I do? Will you release them unharmed and alive? Will you engage in dialogue with the leaders who follow me? The Empire does not belong to one man. It belongs to all. That includes you, and all should have a say in shaping the galaxy." Luke wasn't a negotiator or diplomat and didn't know if he was pushing too far, but he had to at least attempt a peaceful resolution to this. He drew comfort from Leia's bright presence behind him, sensing her support of his efforts. "That stinks of the old Republic," hissed the guard, the mechanical inflection carrying across the hall. "And I tire of you wasting my time. Kneel, Jedi, or there will be no Empire for you to rule." The guard raised a crimson-gloved hand. It was evident to the companies of stormtroopers and huddled massive dignitaries alike that this was the final warning the guard was willing to give. The elites of the galaxy turned to the new emperor, a discordant assortment of fearful demand and incensed denial. They had never seen anyone so composed, so seemingly at ease, so unaffected as the young emperor humbled himself and lowered himself to his knees, leaning and reaching out to place the blaster down away from him. He straightened again from the knees up and looked back up at the second-level mezzanine. They had an unexpected measure of the man, the Jedi, who put all others before his own status or perceived importance, or, as keenly felt by many of those who bore witness to the scene, his own pride. Even amidst the traumatic ordeal in which they found themselves, they were struck to the core at his self-sacrifice and felt moved beyond any experience ever before encountered. The guard looked down at the kneeling Jedi. "Now announce your surrender." Luke remained silent. "Now, Jedi!" the guard urged. Luke's head tilted, as though in thought. "Your words and your thoughts contradict each other. I'm trying to work out why." What do you want about?" "You demand my surrender, yet your thoughts urge me not to. Why do you not truly wish me to surrender?" The royal guard's shocked silence was admission enough of his true intentions. The hundreds of pairs of apprehensive eyes swung to the crimson figure on the mezzanine. The silence dragged on, each brittle second ticking into the next. They waited on tenterhooks for the tension to break one way or another. The royal guards peppered throughout the hall waited on their commander's signal. The stormtroopers likewise. At length the guard sighed. His posture relaxed ever so slightly, shoulders easing down, and with it his raised hand gradually lowered. It wasn't the rapid signal to attack. The tension eased off in controlled increments, without triggering violent reactions. "My master warned me of this ability of yours to read minds. Clearly the measures I undertook to counter it were insufficient." "Are you ready, Mara?" Luke said telepathically. "Whatever will happen, it'll be soon." "Ready on your signal, Luke." The guard's icy voice gripped their hearts with frozen fingers, stole the breath from their lungs as though Darth Vader walked amongst them once more. "You're perfectly correct, Jedi. Even with you dead, you have already paved the way for traitors into the upper echelons of the Empire. The galaxy must be purged. The Empire must be built anew. The sanctity of our true master's vision will be preserved." This guard wasn't just dangerous, Luke realized. He was insane. Long live Emperor Palpatine! And with that bellow, in a matter of seconds, all the royal guards in the hall melted away down dark passageways and vanished from the hall. His senses on full alert, Luke rose to his feet. "They're all in the passageways."
"I can see that."
"Can you contain them inside?"
"Inside."
"Within the passageways. Override control, keep them contained."
"Oh, yes, with pleasure."
"Can you jam their transmissions?"
"The passageways are already secure, no transmissions in or out."
"Good. We'll bring them out and arrest them later."
"Of course."
"Honestly."
Yes.
"Mara, we're not leaving them down there." "Mara? Mara!
I'm only messing with you. Now, shoo, go and figure out what situation they've got you into up there before."
The very air imploded. A vortex swallowed up all sound and feeling from the hall, momentarily leaving nothing but a void, then blasted out in a deafening explosion that rippled along the windows on one side of the hall. The red glass warped in their frames, bowing out like a rushing tidal wave, before fracturing into millions of glass shards and fragments that showered the entire hall. As quickly as it had come, the blast died down. The ensuing silence was eerie and lasted all of several seconds. Gradually, with a tentative shift of disbelief, a quiet murmur began and grew as all the people realized that they were still alive. Some bore cuts from the flying glass, but it was welcome relief in comparison to the utter destruction they had been expecting. Cries of profound relief rose up and down the hall. "That can't be it." Han frowned. "This isn't right." Chewie rumbled unhappily in agreement. Leia was peering at her brother. "Luke?" "You work, kid?" No, I'm fine." Luke trailed off as he stared at the windows, the edges of the tall window frame still clinging to the last of the broken red glass. And in the middle, they could see the faint shimmer of the energy shielding wrapped around the palace exterior. The force swirled with frenetic energy. "It's not over yet." The certainty in his voice brought a chill to those around him. "Luke, what is it?" Leia pressed. Luke's reply was prevented by a slow, lethargic clapping that resounded around them, interspersed with long seconds full of mockery and disrespect. All hail the Emperor, came a droll, cynical voice that rang across the hall. Luke turned to Dangor, who was winding his way slowly towards him from amidst the cluster of dignitaries whose domed shielding had failed earlier. The people edged back, removing themselves from the line of fire, clearing a direct path, like the parting of the sea. "Bravo, your majesty," Dangor drawled with dripping sarcasm. "I shudder to think of the danger we were in. How fortunate we were that you were here to..." He gave a theatrically exaggerated gasp. "Save us all." Nobody missed the direct ridicule of Luke's words from the holocast. Luke's arm snapped out to the side, barring an enraged Han in his tracks. "Why, you..." Roaring sublight engines drowned them out, rumbling underfoot and rattling the broken glass and dishes scattered across the floor. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned to the vast windows and were met with the sight of a ship hovering barely a stone's throw outside. Curved wings reminiscent of a TIE fighter framed the rounded cockpit, but the extended arrow-shaped front nose, most likely housing cargo or crew compartments, made it a model that few had seen before. "What freakish mutation is that?" Han exclaimed.
"The scimitar,"
came Mara's grim voice over their comlinks.
"A unique Sith infiltrator that was never reproduced. Darth Maul used it. Palpatine had it modified with MG2 general-purpose warhead launchers and LS9.3 laser cannons. It has enough arsenal to blow out the entire palace."
"By the Sith in hells," Han muttered. The slit of the cockpit's viewport flickered and its red tint receded, giving them a clear view of the pilot attired in the crimson red of the Royal Guards. I thought we just got rid of you rats!" 2 more explosions were heard from elsewhere in the palace, but for a moment nothing could be seen. Then the shielding outside of the hall windows flickered and vanished. They had hit the shield generators. Mechanical words amplified from the ship resounded through the now unprotected broken windows of the hall. "Traitors to the true Empire! For your treason, the ruins of the Imperial Palace will be your final resting place. There is no escape. Long live Emperor Palpatine!" Multiple proton torpedoes burst forth from the ship, bright flares spelling their death and destruction.